Question 1. Why is it important that history is also told by the winners, not and but by the losers? And how is this relevant to the book and everything? So history is often told by the winners, which can leave out the experiences of those who were exploited or silenced. And so it's important to hear from like the loser side because it's showing a more complete and honest perspective and basically understanding of the past. And so in Open Veins of Latin America, Galeano explains history through this type of perspective, and he focuses on how Latin America resources and people were used by outside powers and how that exploitation created a long-lasting inequality that is still shown until today. And his message is that wealth of powerful nations often came at the expenses of others. And so it's important. This is also why the book remains more important to everyday people than to academic scholars, because Galeano is writing in a clear and emotional way that connects to real life, not just like theories. And so while many scholars could criticize it for not being written in a more academic, scholarly format, he is writing to people who value it, because some of these people, it could be their reality, and it demonstrates why, and it basically helps explain why inequality is still existing till today. Question 2. Do you believe that a colonial set of society you remain oppressed to absorb an alien designated sterile memory fabricated by the oppressor that prevent us from better understanding reality and fully solved issues related to development and sustainability? How, why, and what fabricated those memories? And so yes, I do think there's some truth behind this idea. In colonial set of societies, we often grow up learning the perspective from the more wealthier side, and usually history is shaped by those in power, and so it kind of creates like a fabricated memory that hides exploitation, and it makes the kind of inequality seem normal. And so because of this, people may misunderstand development, thinking it only came from hard work, where it also came from colonization and resource extraction. And so it makes it harder to solve issues like inequality when it itself isn't fully recognized. And so examples of these false narratives could be ideas that colonization was mostly beneficial, or that wealthy countries developed on their own and didn't have the help of others. And so these short narratives these simplified narratives kind of limit how we understand realities today. Question 3. Why Orlando literally argued in 1976 that Latin America free enterprises is compatible with civil liberties? Is this the reality you can apply today within the U.S. and how the U.S. deals with Latin America? Why or why not? And so in 1976, Orlando argued that in Latin America, free enterprises often depended on limiting these civil liberties. And so he saw that free market policies were enforced under dictatorship, where governments restricted rights to protect economic interests. And so the idea was that when powerful groups benefited from the economy, governments may suppress opposition to keep that system in place. And so economic freedom came at the cost of political freedom. And this can still be shown in cases today, as the U.S. has historically U.S. promotes democracy, but has historically supported Latin American countries that prioritize economic interests as well, while limiting rights and taking those rights away. And so while it's less extreme now, the tension between economic power and civil liberties still exists. Question 4 asks us, please describe the perfect vicious circle argued by Galeano. And so in Open Veins of Latin America, Galeano describes a perfect vicious circle where Latin America is trapped basically in dependency. And so foreign debt and investment forces countries to keep exporting more and more resources. But these same foreign powers can consume the profit, so the countries never truly develop. And so they stay dependent and in debt. And so to keep the system going, workers had to be controlled either through low wages, limited rights, or even force. And so that's why Galeano says that they're held as prisoners because their labor supports foreign wealth while they continue to remain poor. Number 5, finally provide an overall take on the book and what tools the book gave you to understand the political, social, economic, and cultural elements of geography across the globe. And so in this section, Galeano shows how little has changed despite independence. And so the foreign debt, investments, and exploitation keep wealth flowing, while people still end up remaining poor. And so the chapter basically helps me clarify the political, economic, and social, culturally, the cultural geography of everything. And so politically, it shows how governments act under foreign pressures. Economically, it shows how dependence on resources and debt limits development. And so, and then with cultural, it highlights the resilience of people who end up surviving and resisting this exploitation. Question 6. How long the military dictatorship lasted in Argentina? What did President Alfonso order when democracy came back regarding human rights and military persona? So the military dictatorship in Argentina lasted from 1976 to 1983, which is about 7 years. And so when democracy returned, President Raúl prioritized human rights. And so he ordered trials against the military leaders that were responsible for crimes during the dictatorship, and held them accountable for forced disappearances, tortures, and killings. And so this was basically a historical step in restoring justice and strengthening dictatorship for Argentina. Question 7. Who were Julio and Luis Moreno Ocampo? Why did the social economic background of Moreno help this case? And so Julio and Luis were the main prosecutors in the trial against Argentina's military leaders after the dictatorship. And so they worked to hold those responsible for human rights abuses accountable. And Moreno, his social economic background helped their case because he came from a more traditional anti-communist family with military connections. And so this made it harder for critics to dismiss the trials as politically biased, giving the prosecutors more credibility and broader public support. Question 8. What is your impression of closing arguments from Julio Stracero? And so Julio's closing arguments are really powerful and direct, clearly defending human rights and emphasizing the need for justice after these years of violence and silence. And so he stands out as he is a voice basically for these victims and makes sure that these crimes aren't ignored and are justified, like that there's justice for these victims. And so his final message shows that holding military accountable is essential for rebuilding justice and making sure that this stuff that kind of doesn't happen again. Why does the documentary argue that the bourgeoisie rose against the leftist government, Unidad Popular UP? And so in the documentary, it argues that the bourgeoisie rose against the Unidad Popular government because they felt that their economic power and privileges were basically being threatened. And so policies like nationalization, and wealth redistribution challenged their control over industries and resources. And so they resisted basically to protect their interests. Question 10. How, according to the documentary, did the opposition use food to attack Allende's government? And so the documentary shows that the opposition used food as a political weapon by creating shortages. And so the businesses and distributors hoarded goods or stopped selling them and supplying them, making it seem like the government was basically failing. And so this caused frustration and among the population, and basically weakened the support for Salvador Allende. Question 6. In May, June, and July of 1973, the opposition blocked all laws that Allende's government tried to pass, pleasing the 6 specific ones mentioned in the documentary in order to take on them. And so the opposition blocked key reforms such as land distribution, nationalism of industries, and economic control meant to stabilize prices and wages. And so my take is basically that this was a strategy to make the government fail, and they did so by blocking solutions and they worsened the crisis and then just blamed the government for it. And so they blocked the constitutional reform to legalize the nationalization process, the nationalization of key industries beyond copper, the agrarian reform expansion, the state control over food distribution, the price control of wages, and the measures to strengthen workers' participation within the industry. Question 12. What is Patria y Libertad according to the document? What was its role during the time, and what connection does it have? CIA, and also what was the role of the U.S. CIA with the transportation industry in Chile, and what was the relationship between the U.S. and military forces in Chile? And so Patria y Libertad was a far-right nationalist group, and so they used violence and sabotage to basically destabilize the government. And so the documentary links them to support the Central Intelligence Agency. And so the U.S. Through the CIA also supported strikes in the transportation industry, especially truckers, to distribute the economy. So at the same time, the U.S. was able to maintain close ties with Chile's military forces, which helped create the conditions for the eventual coup.